Hello, Corporate Finance Business 630 students. This is Professor Hassey. Our week number 4 introduction video for our class Wednesday, October 21st at 6 p.m. Our subject is cost of capital, chapter 9 in our textbook tonight, capital structure. What does it cost us to acquire assets to maintain the corporate growth and return of our corporation? But before we get to that, we're going to talk about Chapter 13, the additional funds needed model, a way of using financial statement analysis to plan into the future your capital needs. We'll be looking at that from our work of last week in that company that we reviewed in their financial statements. Also tonight or today, you're finishing up case number 1. Some of you are on extension and you have extensions. If you need some extra time and I have yet to know about it, please send me a quick email and I'll be more than happy to grant you a few extra days to post your case number 1 work. We have case number 2 next week, due on in November, but no, don't have to worry about that now. It'll be on chapters 9, 10, and 11. But that'll be the subject of our discussion Wednesday evening, the cost of capital. And speaking of the cost of capital, let's look at a video to refresh our memories about the cost of capital.
In this video, we're going to talk about something called the weighted average cost of capital, which is commonly abbreviated as WACC. So we're going to talk about what it is and how you would go about calculating it, and then we'll walk through an example. So when we think about WACC, this weighted average cost of capital, really what we've got is we've got the financing of the firm. So we've got a firm here. Now this firm is going to be financed from two primary sources. One is debt and one is equity. What does that mean? Well, the firm can get money from borrowing or people can put up equity, shareholders or the owner themselves. So what we're thinking about here is we're looking at this mix of debt and equity, and then we're going to go ahead and basically calculate cost for each one. The cost of equity, that's the RE, and then the cost of debt after factoring in the tax considerations. And we're basically going to assign a cost to each one. But we have to weight these costs, right? Because we don't know how much of the mix this debt or the equity is. Okay, so the debt for the firm might be just 10% of its financing, whereas the equity is the other 90%. So we can't just go ahead and say we'll take a 50-50 split. So this is going to make more sense when we go through an example, but for right now, just let me walk you through this formula. So the weighted average cost of capital is equal to, we've got the firm's equity. Now, depending if you take finance, so you'll be using the market value of the firm's equity, and if you're taking an accounting course, it might just settle for the book value of equity. But in any case, we'll just call it equity here. The firm's equity divided by the total of the firm's debt and equity. Now, when we're talking about debt here, what we mean is interest-bearing debt. Interest-bearing. So we're not just talking about liabilities in general, which might include things like unearned revenue. We want to talk about interest-bearing debt, bonds that the firm has or something like that. So this is right here, what we're trying to do is calculate that proportion of the firm that is being financed by equity. Okay, and then what we're going to do is once we've got that proportion, right, this share of the financing that is attributable to equity, we're going to multiply it by the cost of the firm's equity, right? That's what RE is commonly. This is the cost of equity. Let me just write that here. Cost of the firm's equity, right? And that'll be something like 8%, 9%, 15%. It depends on the firm. But the main idea here is that we have to figure out the proportion of the firm that is financed by equity and then multiply that by the cost associated with that equity. Now we've got, so this is all kind of one big component of WACC is the equity side, but now we've got the debt side, right? So debt is part of this financing of the firm. And so now we have to say, okay, well, we'll take a look at the firm's interest-bearing debt and then see what proportion that is of the debt plus equity. So what proportion is the debt of the firm's financing? And then we're going to multiply that by the cost of debt. Okay, this would be like the yield to maturity on the bonds or something like that. Maybe that's 6% yield to maturity. So the cost of the firm's debt, and then we're going to multiply that by 1 minus the tax rate. Now, why are we doing that? Because we have to remember that we want the after-tax cost of debt because there's a tax shield associated with interest. We'll have a different video on that, but just bear in mind that's why we're multiplying by 1 less the tax rate due to this tax shield. So basically, all we're really doing, we've got a big long equation here to calculate WACC, but all we're really doing is saying what is the proportion of the firm that is financed by equity and what's the proportion that is financed by debt. Okay, and then we're going to take those proportions, those weights, and then we're going to multiply them by the associated costs, the cost of equity and the cost of debt. So let's go ahead and let's work through an example, and I think that you'll find it to be a lot easier when we do that. So we've got an example here where you start a firm, and you start this firm by borrowing $2,000 from the bank, and that $2,000, the bank's going to charge you 6% interest, and then you put up some of your own money, some equity of $8,000. And then let's just say, this calculating the cost of equity is a whole nother video. You can use things like the capital asset pricing model. But right now, let's just say that that's 12.5% without getting into how that we actually calculate that. So then we say, well, we've got a tax rate of 40%. So now we can go ahead and we can just plug the numbers in to this formula that we have here, right? So in the interest of space, I'm going to try and do that down here right below our example. So let's just go through this step by step. So move down a little bit further. So the WACC, our weighted average cost of capital. See, we can't just take these two and say, okay, let's add those up and divide by 2, right? Why can't we do that? Well, because debt is only $2,000 of the financing and equity is $8,000, right? I hope you understand kind of the idea, the concept behind why we're doing this. So the WACC is going to be equal to, and we'll have, let's do the equity side first. So we've got $8,000 in equity, right? So to calculate the proportion of equity, we say 8,000 over 2,000 of debt plus 8,000 of equity. Why are we doing this? Well, look, we've got $8,000 in equity up here, but we know that the firm's total financing is both of these, right? It's 2,000 plus 8,000. So to get the proportion, we're taking 8,000 and then dividing it by that total. And basically what we're seeing here is that we're going to have 0.8 or 80% or however we want to think of it. The financing is coming from this equity source. But now we have to multiply this by the cost of equity, which is 12.5%, which is the same as 0.125. All right, so now we've got kind of the equity component here. Change colors, and now we have to add in the cost, the weighted average cost of this debt here. So now we're going to go and basically do something very similar. Just take now the 2,000, which is this debt, but now we have to weight that. We have to take the proportion of that. So now that's 2,000 over 2,000 plus 8,000. Okay. Now we're going to multiply that by the cost of debt. That's 6%. So that's the same as 0.06. But now we have to factor in that after-tax cost of debt. So what we're going to have is 1 minus the tax rate, 1 minus t, which is 1 minus 0.4. T is just the tax rate. And so now we've got this big long equation. But let me just save you the math here. So our WACC. If we take this whole piece right here, what that comes out to is 0.0072. Okay, and now this piece over here, if we calculate that, excuse me. This piece here, this first piece is actually 0.1. So this is 0.1. Apologize there. And then this piece is 0.0072. So We add these together, and it's 0.1072, and that is equivalent to, and we think about a percentage, so a little easier conceptually, 10.72%. So the weighted average cost of capital for this firm that we started here is 10.72%. Now let's go back here for a minute. Now, if you calculate and you say, okay, let's add up 6% and 12.5%, and let's just say, we'll divide it by 2 and get the cost of capital. Well, what you're doing is now you're just getting, we can call it the average cost of capital, right? Because you're just taking two different costs of capital, the debt cost and the equity cost, and you're just saying let's just divide that by 2. Let's just average it. But we're not taking just the average because we recognize that there are different weights that should be assigned here because 80% of our firm is actually being financed by equity. So more weight is being given to the equity component of our cost of capital. And that's why we call it the weighted average cost of capital.
Okay, that was a good review of many of you have studied this before in prior finance classes, or it's been a while. So that's what one of the highlights of our discussion tomorrow evening in class is, that measurement and what it means, the cost of capital to companies, because it influences so much in the strategic operations of a business. Please refer to week number 4 on Blackboard for a spreadsheet that you could download, which is going to be our review spreadsheet in class. Download it. You can follow along with me in class or just note it for future reference. Here's a PowerPoint that I'm going to be using in class tomorrow evening. So look forward to seeing you all tomorrow, Wednesday evening. Please finish up your case number 1, and I'll see you all Wednesday. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.